And the committee heard a lot of discussion today about the profit margins of large corporations in California, but I would like to remind the committee that 99.2% of all the businesses in California are small businesses. And with this increase, we're looking at, if you add it to the $2 increase that was just recently passed and it hasn't even fully taken effect yet, it's going to be $12,000 a year per full-time minimum wage employee for an employer. So if you have 10 employees, it's $120,000 you're going to have to come up with. And this is over and above. Now, keep in mind that small businesses, it already costs them 38% more to comply with regulations. It costs them 3 times more to comply with taxes. It's things disproportionately hit them harder. And also, one of the things that people haven't really noted a lot is for exempt employees under California law, they have to make twice what a full-time minimum wage worker makes. So you're really giving them a $10 an hour raise, including the last minimum wage increase, and raising the base for exempt employees as well, which is going to impact businesses all over the state and the state itself. So our members, I represent, we have actually 23,000 members in this state, 2,400 manufacturers, about 1 in 10 farmers is a member. We have every type of business you can think of. And I have spoken to literally hundreds of them, and they have relayed the same message to me over and over that if this passes, they're not only not going to expand the majority of the people I've spoken to, but they're going to let some of their staff go. So we will have more people on unemployment rolls. And we see the problem with our unemployment right now in California. So we'll have fewer people making more money. But right now, mom and pop businesses are struggling, and a lot of times they don't even take a paycheck themselves on some given months. And so sticking them with a $12,000 tab per employee is, we're opposed to that. Thank you.
Nicole Rice, California Manufacturers and Technology Association, and we appreciate the discussion about lifting individuals out of poverty and moving them to a middle-class lifestyle. But the minimum wage increase is only part of that discussion. And we would submit that and urge the committee to consider policies that will grow and expand the middle-class job opportunities, i.e. manufacturing. We hear numbers about how jobs are improving and growing in California, and that's great. However, those jobs are averaging in the mid to high 50s, where a manufacturing job that we are not achieving our level of investment or that job attainment are jobs that are in the mid to high 70s. So I think it's appropriate that the legislature consider and discuss how the minimum wage is going to is going to be dealt with in the California instead of an automatic trigger to the inflation rate, because it gives you an opportunity to think and consider policies related to other economic activities that are happening in the state and how those policies are both helping to move individuals from poverty wages and lifestyles, but also to bolster those industries where individuals who are at low incomes can move to the middle class. That is their jumping point to these middle class job opportunities. And unfortunately, California is not getting its investment in manufacturing jobs. We're only getting about 2% of our investment in the nation for manufacturing jobs. So as it has been said by other speakers, our manufacturers will also be impacted by upward pressures on our costs related to a policy that's being proposed here today. So we urge the committee for a no vote, but we also urge you to consider policies that will improve manufacturing and middle-class job opportunities so that we can give individuals a place to move from the entry level of low-income opportunities. Thank you.
Great, thank you. At this time, we're going to take on the add-ons in opposition. If you'll please come forward, your name, organization, and your position, please.
Good afternoon. Brian Little of California Farm Bureau Federation, also in opposition. Thank you.
Carlos Machado with California School Board Association, in opposition.
Yolanda Benson, representing the California Asian Pacific Chamber of Commerce, representing over 600,000 API businesses, and this impacts all of those businesses in a very negative way. We oppose.
No, we have one.
Okay, at this time we understand that, I understand that we have some folks that would like to come up that would identify somewhere in between. Maybe a little opposed, expressing a little bit of concern. So for those identified as tweeners, if you'll please come up and speak to your concerned opposition. Yes.
A tweener.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members. Carl London here representing the California Disability Services Association. We're a organization of 100 community-based organizations that serve people with developmental disabilities throughout California. The minimum wage legislation that we're talking about here has the potential to affect us in three ways. One, impact on the entry-level workers we have that work in this field, obviously raising that rate. The second is compaction on those people who have been in the field for a little while and are just above that line. And the third is on the exempt staff, people that we have in supervisors' positions, for example, who, in order to be exempt from overtime and other laws, have to make at least twice minimum wage, as was explained earlier by one of the earlier advocates. The problem for us is that pretty much our sole base of funding comes from you guys, the legislature and the governor, in crafting the state budget. And in 14 of the last 15 budgets, including this one, there's not been an increase for community-based programs. We've had the same 30% cost of living, cost of providing services during that time period, and we have absolutely no capacity to make that money up because you guys control whether we get the increase or not. We can't charge or try to pass along a quarter per loaf of bread increase, to try to offset the raise in a minimum wage that we're talking about here. We do appreciate that at least this year, Senator Leno and others have worked on trying to open a door through special session to raise this issue. There's been committees established on each side that have our name as part of that, but we literally have no capacity whatsoever to absorb this cost unless you fund us. So we would ask consideration that this bill be amended to factor in those costs. In other words, a state mandate on programs that are doing the work the state is mandating us to do. If you don't do that, you're basically destining us to go out of business. And we're talking 50, 60-year-old agencies that work in every one of your communities. The last call you're going to want to get is from an agency that says, I've got 71 families who now cannot find a program for their person, their child, so they can go to work during the day. But that's exactly what's going to happen if you pile on the factor of not giving increases to this community and then further exacerbating it by saying, by the way, you also have to increase the amount you pay to your workers. We don't have the capacity to do that. So we're in an oppose unless amended category. We'd simply ask that you recognize, the impact that you're putting on our agencies by requiring this. You can fix it. You can fix it readily just by simply putting the money in that goes along with that. And at least that doesn't add further injury to the insult we've suffered by not getting a rate increase in this year's budget. If that were done, we could at least feel good about this and raising our lower-end workers' pay. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you. Next.
Hi, my name is Jackie Dillard Voss, and I'm happy to be a tweener, or a teener, because I'm turning 50 this year. I'm representing the California Supported Living Network, and also Assemblymember Cardy. I have an agency here in Sacramento, the STEP program, that employs 630 people. Do I want to raise their rates? I had my payroll department run the numbers, and of those 630 employees, 63% make less than $11 an hour. Well, I would love to raise them to $11 an hour, but there's no state funding. If I look at what I've gone through in the last 8 months of advocating for some state funding, some sort of relief, I ended up in an extraordinary session. So my employees, we're all fighting for our lives. So we look at the 10 to 11 to 13 and we say, that's wonderful, except there's nowhere in that bill that says where I'll get the funding. If I have to wait till the next budget cycle, I'll tell you right now, there will not be 630 employees working for the STEP program. The other part of this, and I have some information, because it just, from the 9 to 10, they raised, the state says you get just the minimum. Okay, there's no recognition for compaction. I want to give you a short story. Someone I've supported for the last 27 years passed away last week. Her direct support professional has worked for her for 20 years. She makes $13 an hour. 20 years. She'll make the state minimum wage, except the state sets those wages. I hear about respecting my employees. I absolutely respect my employees. I respect them more than it's 85% of what I do. I'm not a large corporation. I am a state-funded program. And I don't know how to hit my head against the wall any harder than we have been doing. I look at this budget that was just signed. We celebrated a floor vote. We got opted out, and we got put into an extraordinary session. What faith do I have that there will be funding? What faith do I have that I'll continue to do supported living services? I surveyed my membership. Of those members across the state of California, 18 great providers from far northern regional center to San Diego are no longer accepting supported living support services. I will give you that information tomorrow when I have the first of my extraordinary sessions. I want to pay my employees a livable wage. Be very, very clear. I cannot if you do not fund it. We talk about the middle class, and that's the last thing that I will say, is the middle class. I have supervisors that are mandated by regulation to make minimum ×2. It's not me creating a regulation. If you do not fund this, my 80 supervisors are gone. 80 supervisors. I will tell you, on January 1st, I will eliminate 80 supervisory positions, and that is on the back of the state of California. This is your responsibility. I am all in for minimum wage, Senator Leno, all in with all of my heart and soul. I cannot do it if you do not fund it. Thank you for Assemblymember Thurman. You listen. We get really, I just tell you, this man has taken a lot of heat from our community. Thank you for listening. We respect you. That's probably why we're after you all the time. So I just wanted to say that. And Assemblymember McCarty, I would love for you to see and meet some of those 630 employees. Just, you have to fund it. You have to fund it.
Thank you. Next witness.
Good afternoon. I'm Richard Fitzmaurice. I'm I'm a parent of a child with a developmental disability and from the ARC of Alameda County. And I'm the president of the board of the ARC of California and part of the ARC and United Cerebral Palsy Coalition. The state of California guarantees funding for services for people with developmental disabilities. Through the Lanterman Act, it's been tested in the courts. Those services are provided by nonprofits for the most part in the community. The 22 ARC chapters are a case in point around the state. And this bill increases their costs, and you would think logically that there would be money or a language in the bill that gives us money to cover those costs, but there is no such language. So we have to be in the position of oppose with amendments and then support. After 15 years of rate freezes and rate cuts, we can hardly afford to pay the minimum wage as it is now. If it goes up, as Jackie talked about, the compaction issue, we have one ARC chapter that I know of that's going to cost them $200,000 total. That's $200,000 they don't have without this kind of funding. The situation is grim out there in the community services, and we've got all kinds of people now coming from the developmental centers. We've got to get this funding taken care of. So the ARC of California, UCP, is opposed with amendments and then support. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, any add-ons that fall within this category of in-between?
Mr. Chairman, members, Dwight Hanson on behalf of the Alliance supporting people with intellectual developmental disabilities. I'll associate my comments with all those that have just been made. We ask you for the amendments. Thank you.
Thank you. Next witness. At this time, we're just doing add-ons.
Hi, Stacey Sassano with Strategies to Empower People. I would love to say that I'm in support of this. However, as a state-funded agency, there's just no money there to support it. So unless it is amended to include not only the minimum wage, but the compaction issue and the 2 times minimum wage for supervisors, I have to respectfully but strongly oppose unless amended. Thank you.
My name is Kevin Rath. I'm the Executive Director of Manos Home Care in Oakland, serving 1,300 clients with disabilities. I'm also with the California Respite Association. We oppose unless amended for funding. Thank you.
I am Joy Scott with the California Respite Association as the co-president. I also run a respite agency in Yuba City, and we strongly oppose unless amended. Thank you.
My name is Jim Stream. I'm the Executive Director of the ARC of Riverside County. And we also would mirror exactly what Jackie says and what Mr. London has said, and our president of our association, the ARC Association. We're essentially out of business if we do not get funding through this bill or through the budget. It's as simple as that. We cannot continue. And that's true of a lot of Inland Empire organizations. We're just simply out of business. Thank you.
Richard Royce, Executive Director of Northern California In Alliance. And Senator, I appreciate the bill you've put forward here and the work you've been doing with us in the DDS community. It's been outstanding. Unfortunately, however, we have to oppose this bill unless amended because, as you're aware, the system has been collapsing, and for us, this would push us over. Thank you very much.
Dane Hutchings with the California Grocers Association. Apologize for coming in late on the opposition. We were held outside and sergeants wouldn't let us in, so weren't able to oppose, but the association does have an opposed position. Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon. Angie Minetti with the California Retailers Association. Also apologize for being out of order as well, was held up outside, but we are opposed to SB3. Thank you.
Hello, Trevor O'Neill for the California Association for Health Services at Home and the Home Care Association of America, representing private pay home care providers for elderly and disabled individuals who are paying out of pocket for care services in their home. Continual increases to the minimum wage hold the real potential to drive people out of their homes and into institutionalized care facilities. We are in opposition.
Good afternoon. I'm Elizabeth Ash, and I work for On My Own Independent Living Services, a company that serves people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. I work in human resources and responsible for the hiring and retention of our employees. I would like to express my opposition on SB3. I'm all for paying employees a higher wage to work in our industry, but I am concerned that unless the bill is amended, our company and companies like ours will not be able to stay financially viable due to the impact of this unfunded mandate. So I oppose unless amended. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Kate Pitterebecki, also with On My Own Independent Living Services. As you're all aware, exempt employees must be paid at 2 times the minimum wage rate. If we raised the minimum wage, our industry does not have the luxury of raising our rates, and it's simply not sustainable. So we oppose SB3 unless it is amended to be fully funded. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Tim Hoban. I'm the father of a 31-year-old daughter with intellectual disabilities. I've have very deep concerns about raising the minimum wage in this case, although philosophically I'm so troubled by workers who can't live on the money that that currently exists now in the system. I don't think there's any other choice but to begin to raise funding in a significant kind of way, and I'm talking starting at 10% now and rearranging the whole funding system. I can tell you where the rubber meets the road.
Sir, I need to cut you off.
The families, I mean, we are suffering right now because of this.
Sir, please.
Good afternoon. My name is Cindy Kennedy. I work at a home care agency in San Mateo County as the nursing director, and we oppose the amendment without any amendments. Thank you.
I'm Alma Palma. I'm a retired home care worker, and I oppose this bill.
Okay, that concludes our folks that are in the in-between the support and opposition positions. At this time, I'm going to take it now to the committee. Members of the committee, any questions or comments? Mr. Thurman.
No, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the authors. Clearly, compelling testimony from the witness who talked about having to work 2 jobs just to try and make bare ends meet. I appreciate your consideration of those needs, and I can say as somebody who has often worked minimum wage jobs, including as recently, working a part-time minimum wage job right before I arrived here in the Assembly, I'm deeply sympathetic for what you're trying to do. I'm sympathetic to a lot of the speakers who spoke here tonight. It won't surprise anybody here that I came here prepared to vote yes, and I'm still leaning there. But I would like to hear from some of the advocates who spoke today. In particular, I want to hear from the Restaurant Association and those who are in manufacturing. As I said, I'm prepared to vote for this, but if there's something you want us to hear, I want to hear it, and I want to have the discussion. And I do want to hear from some of the advocates who serve those with developmental disabilities to hear your concerns. But first, I'd like to ask the authors to have a chance to address some of the concerns that were raised by those who serve individuals with developmental disabilities, because I know that both authors have worked very hard and are very committed, like many of us, to supporting those individuals. And before jumping into it, I'd like to give them an opportunity to address their thoughts there. And if you could speak to the provision that was referenced a couple of times about exempt workers having to be paying twice the minimum wage. I want to make sure I understand how that provision will work.
Okay. Thank you, Assemblyman. I share your concern, as we all do, with regard to those who serve in a variety of capacities, Californians who are in need of special services. What you didn't hear in any detail was from Jennifer Fearing, who is the director of statewide, or represents the statewide nonprofits association of thousands of nonprofits in full support of the bill. And she had testified at our, Ms. Fearing's here, at our labor committee hearing on the Senate side. So this community actually is not divided in its support for raising, just that they make a very clear and sound case that many of them will not be able to survive if there's not state funding provided for their increased costs. It's unfortunate that their leadership, those who came to say oppose unless amended, those who organize their voices here, and their voices here are very welcome, of course, as a part of the conversation, didn't better clarify to them that there never has been a minimum wage bill with an appropriation in it. That's not how we do it. This is a budget issue. And it's not for lack of trying that, as chair of the Senate Budget Committee and chair of the Conference Committee, that we didn't attempt, in fact, the bill that you voted for on your floor that Monday preceding, I guess it was June 15th itself, as the bill that we voted for, June 15th, did restore many of the cuts that have been made to the developmental disability community. Unfortunately, the governor would have none of it. So what we did also have in that bill that we passed was trailer bill language that I had worked on with the community and assured them that we would put into our trailer bill. It requires the Department of Health and Human Services Developmental Services Task Force, so there is a task force, that will make recommendations on overall rate revisions. And that's going to be now a big part of the special session. And though I disagreed with the governor in his lack of support for raising the reimbursement rates, I do understand his concern that we didn't have a sustainable and ongoing funding source for those restorations. So it's my understanding of why he has called for the special session to deal with this directly. And he has made it clear that he is not necessarily in opposition to a new and dedicated funding source for this. So I completely understand that there is great disappointment within the community, heartbreaking disappointment, a sense that promises have been, if not made, strongly suggested, and they're left with nothing. And so with that experience through the budget process, where should their hope be through the special session? What I can ask right now is to have faith. I have to have faith as a legislator because I've been let down and I've been disappointed. I've got to believe that there will be political will It's easy to pound our chests and say, restore the restorations, restore the reimbursement rate. This is unacceptable, unsustainable, whether we're talking about our Medi-Cal provider rate or specifically for the developmental disability provider rates. But how are you going to fund it? It will take new revenue for this purpose. And it will take a 2/3 vote. And it will take bipartisan support. So I've got to believe that reasonable minds will come together to do what we must do. I don't want to get too diverted into this, but I do want to just conclude by saying we know the federal government is directing us to deliver our services at the community level rather than the state level. We're going to be closing our developmental centers. We cannot let our local infrastructure fall any further because we're going to repeat history and find that we've directed a whole community of people to community services that are no longer there. So that's what the special session's about. We did put in that trailer bill with regard to the task force that reads, quote, reflect reasonable costs necessary to sustainably provide quality services and supports, including but not limited to federal, state, and local mandates regarding employee wages and benefits. Now, the governor tweaked it, Department of Finance tweaked it a bit further in the Budget Bill Junior, but the intent is clearly still there that this task force, which will be making recommendations as to how we restructure this entire rate revision, must consider that. So we're addressing it. We did our best to get the strongest language in the trailer bill. I think we've done a reasonable job there. And I agree, we have to restore rates and we have to cover the cost. But no minimum wage bill, historically or prospectively, is going to have an appropriation in it. That will happen through the budget process. It's my intent to make sure I would never leave these people high and dry. We must raise the minimum wage for all the reasons already stated, and we concurrently must make sure that the budget reflects those additional costs for all of the people who spoke today.
Thank you, Senator, for speaking to it. And
I know Senator Leyva has a slight.
I'm sorry, please.
I just want to respond to your question, Assemblymember, about the restaurant industry. And the gentleman who spoke talked about the 63% increase in wages over 3 years that this would create. And that is the biggest increase we've ever seen. But we're in crisis. We are the 7th largest economy in the world, and we have more people living in poverty than ever before in the state of California. So we're not doing something right. The other thing I would say is I remember when the economy tanked during the Great Recession, I was still representing grocery store workers. And I remember the restaurant industry saying to me, well, at least people have to go to the grocery store. People don't eat out when they don't have money. So when workers, as I said before, when workers make more, they spend more. If workers have the money, they're going to go to restaurants. They're going to eat out. They're going to make sure that the restaurant workers or the restaurant owners have more business than they've seen before. And I understand that this is scary. And if you run a business, it is scary thinking about this wage increase. Imagine how scary it is to work every week, every month, and not have enough to pay your bills. Thank you.
Just drop the mic. I hear you, Senator Leyva. I appreciate you both. I appreciate Senator Leno. I know how hard you've worked to try and address the issues about increasing rates for those who are served in the developmental disability community. I share your hope that the special session will really give rise to rate increases that will reverse decade-long lack of support from the state and the governor and governors, I should say. I am also hopeful that it will create enough revenue to address the additional wages that will be needed to support what I hope will pass here, a minimum wage increase across the board. And I hope that I'd like to ask if it's Mr. London or the representative from STEP, if they could just specify what those costs really mean so that when we are going into the special session, we can be thinking about that. Because I'm sensitive to the fact that the agencies that serve the people served are struggling to stay open. And I get that. And that's because of a lack of funding from the state. But it's helpful to understand what the cost to that sector represents for when we go into that special session, because I just want to be able to put it in context. And I get it when someone says we will close, but if we can just put it in context about what the dollar amount represents to the sector, so we've got good data to make good informed choices going forward, I for one, would find that helpful. Mr. London?
If you could come forward.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Thurman, appreciate the question. We'll certainly work on that with Senator Leno, yourself, and others to get at that. Again, there's three major issues for us. One is just the impact of the minimum wage being brought up, so that impacts our lower level, typically entry level workers, as I know you're aware because of your work in the industry.
It wasn't very long ago.
Yeah. Secondly is what we call compaction, which is the issue of when you have people that have been there much longer than an entry-level worker, and all of a sudden the bottom end creeps up so close that they get to where their experience is no longer valued. You can't really pay for it because there's not the funding for it, and they start to look elsewhere at other positions and will leave or have extreme dissatisfaction. Then the third issue is the exempt problem, where staff by law have to be paid double in order to avoid overtime and other rules. Typically supervisorial positions, those aren't covered, and we can try to figure out what those numbers look like. The rate increases that you're talking about in special session would potentially help a great deal as well, but we really don't have a choice but to oppose unless amended to accommodate this. And I do want to say that in past, in the state budget, we have done minimum wage increase recognitions to put money into the state budget as minimum wage was drug up. We have done that legislatively in the history of this legislature.
I agree.
On a number of times.
It doesn't happen through an appropriation in a bill.
Yeah, it's typically happened through the budget bill where we've done that, and we haven't done it in this budget. So we're kind of saying at some point here, cart before the horse for us anyway.
Understood. We are where we are now, though, right? And I hope that we can continue working together through the special session to look at that rate increase. And you said you can get us a number that we can review.
We can work with the staff to try to ask the right questions. The budget staff are much smarter than I am. So
I don't know about that. I think you do quite well, but thank you. Thank you.
I actually have my agency numbers if you want.
I'm happy to see what you have.
So just for my agency with the 630 employees, the unfunded mandate with the $10 is $1.4 million, and going into the $11 an hour, it's $1,975,000, and that's just for my one agency. So I do have the paperwork for you.
Thank you.
And just the task force, it can't wait. I just want people to know it's not us crying wolf. I just really.
We hear you, and we hear you. We believe you. And as the senator has said, the special session is our opportunity to work together there. Thank you. Through the chair, I just had a question for the representatives from the Restaurant Association and Manufacturing. Just wanted, I appreciate what you had to say. Your graph was very helpful to see the increases. What I wanted to just be clear on is if you could just speak to what you saw as the direct negative impact to your members, because I get that it's hard. We are not trying to penalize small businesses. We understand that's where jobs come from. And I'm sure that many of your members are small business, and we want to support them. That's our economic development. But we also get that folks who are in those jobs also have to be able to survive and support their families and spend money in those communities, and probably will spend money in some of those same businesses. And we know, it was spoken to that there was actually a decrease in unemployment since the minimum wage increase, and you did lay out the changes in what we pay, but I didn't hear you speak about what the direct negative impact was to your members. I just want to be clear that I've heard that.
Sure, and thank you for the opportunity, and let me try and be brief, but I'll hit a couple of general ones and a couple that are specific to the restaurant industry. I think today's debate is fascinating. I've been at these debates for almost 18 years now, and I've never seen the disability community and the advocates in the position they are. It's almost like a canary in the coal mine, because in the past, we've had small, modest increases over time in the minimum wage and never this huge shock that has my members so alarmed. And I think you're seeing the same alarm there. Our option, I guess, and their fear is to raise prices to try and recapture this wage amount. But their fear is, to your point, people won't go out. People aren't going to pay at a certain amount for a hamburger or a steak or whatever it is, that you see a direct drag when prices have to go up that much. They handle a 63% increase in the labor. So I think you're seeing from this community an argument that, shoot, we can't cover our wages and the state's not providing the support to cover this size of an increase. And you're hearing, I think, from us an inability or fear that there's an inability to recapture through price the increase that's coming.
Do you have that data? And I know that in my community we saw minimum wage increases in 3 cities. And the restaurant industry in particular, we paid very close attention to that. And do you have data that since the last minimum wage that people have gone out less? I've heard opposite, but I just want to
I'll try and gather information on your community generally. I don't know about that. I think
statewide.
Statewide, we had an increase to $9 an hour in a strong economy. So that's $1 in an environment where wages had grown a little bit, but it's increasing to 13 over the period of time we're talking about that has people alarmed. I think we have a history of grumbling, but digesting 50-cent and dollar increases to the minimum wage.
No pun intended, digesting.
Yeah, thank you. Pun intended.
Got it.
So that's one. I mean, the two other things I just say from the restaurant perspective, I know for me, probably if we took a show of hands in this room, there's probably half this room that got their first job in a restaurant.
I
did. It's sort of, we view it as the starting point and the entry point. And with that wage comes training on how to show up on time and how to be a good employee and how to work with your coworkers and all those things that go into these jobs. Our fear is as the entry point gets higher, the ability to provide those opportunities go down. One. The other unique impact, at least in our world, when you look at table service restaurants, the minimum wage workers are all tipped workers for the most part. The back kitchen staff is making far more, usually dollars more than minimum wage. It's the person who's earning tips on top of that. And our studies and our data show that it's averages statewide in the $20 to $25 range. Those are the people who are going to see the benefit of this very large increase. And we fear that it's going to come at the expense of people that you actually intend to benefit. That the dollars are going to be sucked up to the extent they exist, the labor dollars, funding increases to people already making a living wage at the expense of people who would otherwise might enjoy wage increases if it were more modest.
I think we agree on many things, but I still agree that the increase is needed. But I appreciate you helping us get more data. Right. Thank you, sir. To the Manufacturing Association, you talked about jobs that pay $70,000 a year. My only question was, if the jobs are paying that tells me they're being paid much higher than minimum wage. Why the concern about us increasing the minimum wage?
Absolutely. I appreciate the question, Assemblymember Thurman. So I'll give you an example. When I talked to one of my manufacturers in the North Coast area, and I asked him, what does this whole minimum wage debate mean to you? And what his response was is that the markets that they compete in are global. And all the different cumulative effects and factors that he has to deal with, his competitor overseas does not. So they can still sell into the California market, but not be subject to all the pressures that he has, cost-wise, expense-wise, regulatory, that he does, being a California manufacturer. So his exact quote to me was, California needs to require that person also to pay $13 an hour. So that's the problem. It's the cumulative effect of everything. It makes California manufacturers more energy efficient, more environmentally friendly, and better corporate citizens, but it also impacts our ability to continue to compete. And the reality of it is that the senator's right. We have seen a minimum wage increase in a strong economy. I can't tell you what's going to happen in 2 or 3 years, but I'm concerned about what's going to happen in 5 or 10 years when the manufacturing industry starts looking at the fact that they can still sell into the California market but locate somewhere else. It's a strong industry here. It's one of our bedrock industries in California, and these manufacturers want to stay here and be part of the California economy. So that's what we're trying to do.
Thanks for the clarification, and I get it. I think manufacturing in particular is a very difficult industry for us to keep competitive because, believe it or not, other states pay less than California. And then what happens outside of the United States. And we can't fix that here today, but I think that's something that we'd all be committed to working on together, maybe in this committee. I don't think that this bill, though, disadvantages our manufacturing community, but I appreciate you clarifying your statement. Thank you so much.